All right, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of The Sky Tonight. And this is Seth Mayo, Curator of Astronomy for the Lohmann Planetarium at MOAS. Glad to be with you again for a tour of what we can see this week. And I want to say happy summer. We just entered the beginning of summer for us here in the Northern Hemisphere since the summer solstice occurred this past Saturday, June 20th, which marked the highest point the sun is in our sky and the longest day of the year. So if you want to hear more about that kind of stuff, you can check out our last episode from last week where I do explain what the summer solstice is and how that works in a little more detail. But anyway, so for this episode, I want to talk about the summer sky and kind of what to look out for as we go farther into the summer months. And so let's get right to it. This week we're covering June 22nd through June 28th. And so we'll see what things look like around that time, but I'll show you what to expect even later on into July and even August. So let's go ahead in time here, moving pretty quickly, and I'll go a little faster than that. We'll go pretty quick, just get that sun out of the way as we rotate Earth pretty quickly, setting the sun in the west for about 8:25 this week. And there's a little bit of a moon there. We'll maybe just briefly talk about that and how it's going to move from the western part of the sky later on. So let's continue on here, make it a little later. I'm going to go a little bit later in the evening, so we'll go to about 11 o'clock. And the reason why is just it'll give us a really good view of the eastern sky. And that's where we can see all of these lovely summertime objects rising in that area. So if you're like looking towards the east where the sun rises from, you'll find wonderful things for this time of the year. So we're going to just kind of move in that direction, mostly focus in the east. And so let's like slide ourselves over. All right. So starting out, some of the really obvious things, and I'll just kind of go with the bright things first. So if you look down here in the southeast, you have these two planets here. They're not always here in the summer. So planets are not as periodic as the stars are. You know, you always see the same stars at the same time of the year if you're in the same location. But planets kind of on their own schedule and their own orbits, and so they're not always in the same place each year at the same time. But this year, in 2020, for the summer of 2020, we have these two planets. This is Jupiter. If you haven't noticed it already, the biggest planet in the solar system. It's really shining. And then Saturn underneath it. And for those who are not aware, planets just look like stars that are not twinkling in the sky. And that's a great way to distinguish between stars and planets. But besides Jupiter and Saturn, which are rising higher and higher and earlier each night as we go further into the summertime, you'll also find these amazing stars and constellations, groups of stars. And in this area, you'll find this very large sort of foggy band in the sky. Now, I realize, you know, a lot of us have to deal with light pollution and city lights and those types of things, just the reality of our modern technology. And we need the lights, but sometimes, you know, we have too much of it shining into the sky. It makes it hard to see the Milky Way. And in the summertime, it is very well placed in the sky. It's really nice as it arcs across kind of the east from sort of the northeast to the south like that. And it's very, very nice. And the brightest part of the Milky Way is also visible in the summer. I can actually enhance things, or I can pretend like we're in a dark spot and make the sky even darker and really exaggerate things a little bit. And there you go. Look at that Milky Way. I think one of the most beautiful things in nature that many of us can't see. And that's the disk of our own galaxy, our own Milky Way galaxy. And we live in the disk. So we're looking through the disk of our own spiral galaxy. We live in what's called a barred spiral. And in the summer, since this barred spiral, this disk is well placed in the sky, there's a lot of interesting objects in this area. Stars, but also deep space objects that you would need binoculars or a telescope to see. But it's rich with all these interesting things. So I'll go over some of them that are really nice. So anyway, let me turn back on a little bit more of the the realistic sky, and we'll just kind of head to the southeast a little bit. And I've mentioned this in previous episodes, but in the southeast and rising more into the south later on, we have this big S shape. This is the constellation called Scorpius. I'll click on its brightest star, Antares, which is a red giant star. It's a behemoth of a star, way bigger than our sun. And I will draw it for you. And you'll see a few other constellations may pop up as well, and that's fine. So that's Scorpius, the scorpion. You can see the body, the tail, and the stinger. And then right next to it in this area, this is Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is a centaur. At first glance, kind of hard to see the centaur, but when I look at this, I notice the teapot shape. If you look in here where I'm circling, you'll find a teapot kind of object. This is the handle. This is the lid and the spout. That's an asterism, a star shape, not as formal as a constellation, sort of like the Big and Little Dipper. Those are also called asterisms. So the teapot is a good one for the summertime, and it really does look like a teapot, but it's actually part of Sagittarius. That shows you, it's kind of part of the torso, the body of this half-man, half-horse creature from Greek mythology. And it looks like he's shooting an arrow into the back of Scorpius. So this is a really great area to look at in the summertime. Not only have these prominent constellations from Greek mythology, but if you look in between the arrow of Sagittarius and the stinger of Scorpius, in this area, approximately where I'm circling, is the center of our galaxy. A black hole that exists 26,000 light years away. We call this our galactic center. That black hole point is actually called Sagittarius A. And there's a lot of stuff around that black hole. Can't see a black hole, it's invisible, but has a lot of gravity. It's 4 million times more massive than our sun, and so it attracts a lot of things around it. And this is the area of the Milky Way that's really bright. It's the brightest section because it's the bulge of our galaxy. It's the central region of our galaxy, and so you actually can see that in the sky, especially in a dark place. So this is really great for this time of year to see the center of the galaxy, know there's a black hole there, and then also find numerous objects in this area. And most interesting deep sky objects do lie along the Milky Way because that's where most of the stuff exists in our galaxy. So to prove that to you, let me turn off, well, actually, you know what? I'll leave the constellations on. I think that makes a little more sense. I'm going to turn on our deep sky objects button. And if I zoom out, there are deep sky objects everywhere, but if you kind of look closely, you'll find that many of them are along the Milky Way because that's the most active area. And as we zoom in, more of them will come into view. I know this is going to look like a lot of things here, and these are all different named objects, star clusters, nebulae, all sorts of interesting features that you can find, celestial objects. And so we can kind of zoom in. As we do, Stellarium is great because it actually shows you real images of places. And I'll show you some of my favorite deep sky objects. The summer is just filled with them. And if you have a telescope or binoculars, you could really see a lot of stuff if you pay attention to this area, especially right above Sagittarius. Remember, there's the teapot shape. Okay. If you look right above the spout or the lid of the teapot, you'll zoom in and you'll find a few different nebulae. These are clouds of gas and dust in space. We have right here, and this is some real pictures here. This is called the Lagoon Nebula right here. So you see this kind of pinkish area, this area. I'll just click on the Lagoon Nebula. I guess it looks like a lagoon. And wow, look at this. This is called an emission nebula, or what's called an H2 region. So it's an area of atomic hydrogen that's being lit up. It's being ionized by young newly formed stars. So this is a star forming region, and the gas is glowing basically from these new stars that emit copious amounts of ultraviolet light. And so that ultraviolet light is making the ionization occur. And it's an amazing sight to see, especially if you have a camera attached to a telescope. You can take long exposures and get these amazing pictures. So Lagoon Nebula is really nice, 4,000 to 6,000 light years away, and a really, really interesting star-forming region in that area. So that's pretty cool. If we kind of move around a little bit, I'll just show you a few other things. In this area, you'll zoom in. This is called the Trifid Nebula. Not too far away from that Lagoon Nebula. It's really close by. Here's Trifid. Trifid, it's like three. It means divided into three lobes. So I guess there's like three sections in this that are all very distinct. There's a lot of different features in here. Emission nebula, dark nebula that are dark and cover up gas and dust, a star cluster in it. Really interesting, another star forming region. It's about 4,000 light years away. There's a lot of great pictures of the Trifid Nebula, and amazing feature in the sky. So those two are not far away from each other, right above Sagittarius. As we kind of move along this area, still inside that Milky Way, we can kind of just do a little flyby of this, what's called the small Sagittarius cloud. It's a huge kind of stellar cluster with just numerous stars. It's 600 light years wide. So if you're going the speed of light, it would take you 600 years to traverse this. And it's really deep. It's like 10,000 to 16,000 light years deep. It's a very, very large area of stars because there's a lot of stuff in this area. And so it makes it a very interesting feature in this part of the sky. And as we kind of move more northward here, we kind of make our way up in this direction. Actually, what we'll do is we'll zoom in around, and you see so many other nebulae and objects here. Actually, there's a couple more in this area we'll zoom back into. I want to show you before we move more to the north. And as we do, we have a couple actually very famous named nebula here. So this is the Omega Nebula, another H2 region, another very active star forming region that could be anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 light years away, and 40 light years across. One of the most brightest and most massive star forming regions in our galaxy, in the Omega Nebula. And so that's a very, very well known object that people take pictures of in the sky doing astrophotography. And then one more in this area that I'll kind of go out to and talk about is actually a really famous one called the Eagle Nebula, right in here. Sometimes people call it the Star Queen Nebula or the Spire. It's another star forming region with a really prominent star cluster inside. If we zoom in right here, see this kind of area right there? I can actually pause the time. This is called the Pillars of Creation. So you have these giant pillars of gas, and the Hubble Space Telescope has been pointed here and took one of the most famous pictures ever from Hubble, from that orbiting telescope, of these big pillars of gas and dust where stars are also being formed. And they're a massive, light years across, and just really, really interesting. With some of them have jets shooting out of them from newborn stars. Very, very interesting area. So the Eagle Nebula is really quite famous. And so look at that. That was just in this area of the sky. This is just filled with all sorts of interesting features. And then we move over here more directly east, and then even slightly to the northeast in this area. Let me turn off these deep sky objects just for a moment, and I'll put them back on. In this area we have something called the Summer Triangle that is rising out of the east. Very prominent. 3 bright stars for this time of year. That's another asterism. These 3 right here. And this asterism forms probably some of the brightest stars you find in the summertime. This is Vega right here, part of Lyra the Harp. Vega is the 4th brightest star in the sky. Down here is a star called Deneb, which is the tail of Cygnus the Swan. That's a nice one. And then we have Altair, part of Aquila the Eagle. So these 2 stars, Vega and Altair, are pretty close to us. Vega is 25 light years away. Altair is 15 light years. Deneb is really far. It's like 2,600 light years away, give or take a couple hundred light years. And that star still is fairly bright to our eyes, which tells you it's a just super luminous star. It's a blue-white giant star, and one of the brightest, or I guess you could say luminous stars in our sky. It's not the brightest star you can see because of how far away it is, but it's still bright for its distance, which tells you that it's just a luminous star. So that's really nice. And not far from that, if I zoom in and see if I can find it without even having to search for it. See this area right down here? And I'll put up our deep sky objects again. in that area, not far from Deneb, is something called the North American Nebula. So another great nebula for the summertime inside the Milky Way. And this is great. It's supposed to look like North America. I guess it's kind of sideways in this view. This would be like the Gulf of Mexico, kind of where Florida is here, all of that. And I guess Mexico would be there, and then the rest of United States there. And so another just massive cloud of gas and dust. It's an emission nebula. Again, the gas is glowing from newborn stars. And so it's a really nice area, but it's really wide. It's like 4 moon widths wide, even more than that. And so it covers a pretty big area. And one more nebula that I'll mention that's really great for this time of year is in Lyra the Harp, in this area here. So this is Vega, the brightest star in the triangle, at the top of the triangle. And so that star is bright, but inside the Harp, it looks kind of like a parallelogram. But if we zoom into it, you'll see this kind of turn on. This is called the Ring Nebula. I will click on that. I will center on it and zoom right in. And then once we get there, we'll find a really interesting nebula. Not as big as the ones I was showing you earlier. The ones I was showing you earlier are, many, many light years wide. Again, that big star field was 600 light years wide. Really, really huge things. This is not as big, possibly about 2.5 light years across. And what this is called a planetary nebula. And a planetary nebula is from a star that was similar in size or mass to our sun that died. It ran out of fuel. And when it did so, when it ran out of its hydrogen gas, it starts to fuse heavier and heavier elements. And as it does so, the star bloats up and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But then it gets so big as it fuses different shells of gas inside its core that its outer layers are not held by the star's gravity anymore. And the star just gently kind of drifts away. The gas kind of pushes away, and what's left behind in the middle is something called a white dwarf. So this is one type of way a star can die. Instead of a supernova explosion being hyper violent and quick, this is a little slower, a little more gentle, and this is what our sun will do. Our sun will never explode. It will just gently bloat up and then push its gas into space, leaving behind the leftover core of our sun, again called a white dwarf. And that object is, imagine something close to the mass of our sun, a little less, but like the size of Earth, just condensed down. So it's a really, really dense ball in the middle, but really small. But it has a lot of, it still has light and energy coming from it, and it's lighting up and ionizing the gas around it. And that's how this nebula lights up, from that white dwarf in the middle. And so these can look very interesting. You can have these kind of circular shapes. Sometimes they can have hourglass shapes, and they come in all different kind of shapes here. But a lot of times they have these round shapes because that's from that gas around the ball of the star kind of bloating out into space. And so this gives you a preview of kind of what our sun will do in about 4 billion years or so. So we have some time to wait. So Ring Nebula is a really interesting feature inside Lyra the Harp that I'm showing you now as we zoom back out. This was, Ring Nebula is pretty far away, about 2,500 light years away. And that sits inside the summer triangle. So as you can see, summertime brings us amazing constellations and stars. This year, 2 planets, and just a treasure trove of nebulae and star clusters and star-forming regions and just beautiful places as you look at the Milky Way in the sky in this area. So going somewhere dark in the summer is great to see all of that and to see that Milky Way arc across the sky. So that's where I'll kind of leave you off with all the great summer objects now that we can look forward to. We're officially in the summertime. And if you haven't known already or hadn't seen an update, that our Lohmann Planetarium is back open. We reopened just about a week and a half ago, and we're doing it safely. We're doing limited shows, or at least shows that are shorter, and but we're still doing programming in there. If you stop by the museum, we're doing it safely as well with other protocol that we're taking. So anyway, maybe we'll see you in the Lohmann Planetarium or back on our virtual tours. We're going to continue doing this. But happy summer, happy stargazing. Hope to see you soon, and take care.